Hello and welcome to this Construction News webinar. My name is Lem Bingley and I'm the editor of Construction News. Today's webinar is part of our Inspiring Women in Construction programme, which has been running for just over 3 years now. The purpose of the programme is to promote diversity and to help women make career progress in our sector. The focus of today's webinar is on organisations rather than individuals. We are asking how businesses in the construction sector can change, and indeed how they are already changing to create a more welcoming place for women. I think we can all agree that change for the better in this aspect will be a journey of discovery rather than a single destination. Before we explore that topic, I want to briefly thank our sponsors who have generously supported this year's series of webinars. Our headline sponsor is Wilmot Dixon. And I'd also like to thank JUICE, the NASC, TRAD and VINCI Construction. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the challenges of video conferencing by now. If any of us disappear suddenly from your screen or freeze without warning, we'll try our best to get back online as quickly as possible. And if I disappear, I'm sure our panel will be able to continue to enlighten you without my interruptions while I get back online. We are scheduled to run for about 45 minutes. We will be taking questions later in the session via the Q&A function. There should be a Q&A option in the toolbar on your screen. Please pop your questions in whenever you like. You don't have to wait for the Q&A section to start. You can also vote to endorse questions you like that have been asked by other people. And that'll help me indeed to ask the questions which are the most popular or which you most want to see answered. We'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our panelists today. They are Sophie Lambert from VINCI Construction Grands Projets, Paige Matthews from TRAD, Osita Madu from HS2, and Trevor Payne from the University of Birmingham. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves now, starting with Sophie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophie Lambert, as Lem said, and I work for VINCI Construction Grands Projets. I am the manager for the site of Deptford on the Tideway project. Some of you may remember me from a previous conference that happened about a year ago in Birmingham, where I stepped up because one of the members of the panel couldn't make it. So I apologize in advance for those who already know me. I hope I'll manage to be as interesting as it was last time, if I was. I've been on site for 10 years. I've worked on big projects like Crossrail and today Tideway. I am an operational. I manage a team of engineers. And I can tell you that I don't see a lot of women coming through the system. So I am trying to do everything I can to recruit and promote women, and I'm also trying to provide, where I can, a role model. That's it for me.
Thank you, Sophie. And you don't have to apologise for appearing twice on an Inspiring Women session. People have to watch me every time, so I'm sure they're delighted to see you again. Paige, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Paige Matthews. I'm the Finance Director for the TRAD Group. I've been with the TRAD Group for just under a year now. The business works predominantly in scaffold contracting and the hire and sales for the construction industry. Previously to that, I worked another part of the Altrad Group, Altrad Services, which was very much focused on industrial services. I've been really fortunate in my career to date to have some really great role models, people who have really pushed me through my career. I'm really excited to be a part of this today and hope that I can learn some things from you guys in the audience, the other panelists, and hopefully help influence the sector overall in my position.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Osita, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning all. My name is Osita Madu. I'm the Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at HS2. I've been in the sector now for 4.5 years, and it's my first work in infrastructure and construction. And it's quite interesting. People ask, what is HS2 sometimes? So this is a high-speed 2 rail project. connecting from Houston to Birmingham and beyond. And prior to me working at HS2, I've probably been in diversity now for about 13 years, having worked in various sectors, financial services before HS2, and before that working for BBC in the media, and then local authorities and housing associations. So there's a good mix of background and understanding of the various challenges organisations face around diversity.
Thanks, Osita. I'm amazed that people haven't heard of HS2, but I suppose there must be a few. Finally, Trevor, if you could introduce yourself.
Certainly. Good morning. My name is Trevor Payne. I'm Director of Estates at the University of Birmingham. I've been in Birmingham just over 5 years now, and one of the main things that I've been doing is delivering our capital plan, about £1 billion worth of investment. We're currently building a new campus in Dubai, a lot of work in Edgbaston on our campus. Prior to joining the university sector, I worked in the NHS for about 29 years in estates management and construction. We're currently restructuring in Birmingham our estates team, and I'm really keen to try and make our team more diverse. So we're actively working on how we can do that. So really pleased to join the conversation today and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Trevor. OK, we should start with the discussion. Paige, I'm going to come to you first with this question. The onus is often put on women to adapt their behaviour if they want to make career progress in construction. And today's discussion is really about looking at what companies can do to at least meet them halfway, if not more so. The idea is we want to see women excel for being themselves rather than having to fit into some artificial mould that feels uncomfortable to them. What do you think are the most important things a company can do to help women?
Yeah, so I think there's some real basics that sometimes organisations overlook. I think I've been reflecting on this. One of the simplest things is to really listen. I think to give women the opportunity to sit with managers and senior leaders within businesses, really get the feedback of how they feel and what their perception is, whether that's somebody within your organisation or, like today, hearing from different people, really listen about the good, the bad and the ugly and take that on board. I think reflecting on the values of your organisation, you mentioned there about the behaviours that women should perhaps have in the industry. I think, again, as a senior leader within the business, it's especially in my position, I want to look at our organisation and look at the values and behaviours we portray and what other people in the industry perceive that to be. I do think there is still a gap and a way to go, and the onus can't fully be on organisations. Again, as a woman in this industry, I think we still have a responsibility to kind of take the opportunities, grab them, run with them, to give other women the confidence to step into those positions. So that's something I'm really passionate about, is opening those opportunities and making sure I kind of lead by example to make more people feel like they can do that.
Thank you, Paige. Trevor, you mentioned in your introduction you haven't always worked in construction. What do you think are the things that companies should be doing to make sure women can be themselves and still excel?
I think it's really important to set the right culture and have values, but actually see it through. This is not about words on paper. It actually has to be delivered and lived. So there needs to be some flexibility and consistency. And I think, there's probably a huge amount of lessons we can learn from the current situation we're in terms of how we change as organisations and how we still continue to deliver, but it's actually demonstrated we can work in different ways. So we maybe need to jump on that message and that opportunity and use that perhaps as a bit of a lever.
Thanks, Trevor. And Osita, from your perspective, obviously HS2 is a big project. I know it's trying to drive forward all sorts of different agendas, but what's your view on what companies ought to be doing to help women to be themselves and to make career progress at the same time?
I think it's interesting when you look at some of the challenges that women face in particular construction sector, and certainly in infrastructure at HS2, we've seen that we are told that there is a need to adapt. Yeah, we all have to adapt to organisation in many ways, but I think where it's particular to women in terms of adapting their behaviour, it's almost that they have to become like men or play a role that's perhaps not really fitting for what they want to do. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that you can be yourself, and be in a position to actually be successful as a woman within construction. So there needs to be a systematic understanding and acceptance of flexible working, for one. So the ability to make sure that the women can work from home, the ability to work compressed hours, part-time hours, in a flexible enough way to make that work. Now, often the challenge back is that's okay if you're in the corporate center and in an office environment. It's much more difficult if you're an operative on a construction site. And we've had, and it's been tested that actually there are ways you can flexibly work on site. There's been a trial by one of our suppliers as part of Costain Skanska joint venture, where they've tried flexible working on a construction site, which actually was very successful, that they started to roll out what they call the Flex 40 scheme to other construction sites. So I think it's about actually acknowledging that you can't be doing the same thing in the way that suits most people in the sector, which are men, that you have to be flexible to accommodate the needs of women working in that sector.
No, I think where companies have done that sort of flexible working approach, Osita, that companies very quickly find that it's not just the women that find an advantage from that, but it's everybody involved, isn't it? Because childcare and school runs and things like that are so often shared in families these days, aren't they?
Yeah, that is true. We also recognise that sometimes there are single parent households, that there are other challenges where shared responsibility may still fall primarily towards the women in the house. So where you create that environment, yes, it benefits most people, but specifically it does benefit women and other people who want to work flexibly. Yes,
thank you, Osita. Sophie, what from your perspective, what have you found that companies do that can help women to excel? You've obviously made progress in your own career. What has helped you?
I wanted to jump actually on 2 points that that Trevor and Osita raised, because I think they were really relevant. The first one was obviously the flexibility side of things. So, and as you've said, both Lem and Osita, I think that if organizations are able to provide more flexibility in general, we will attract different talents, not only women, but a more various pool of people. And this will benefit everyone in the long run anyways. The flexibility has to be not only practical, I think, but also it's in every field, I would say. It's also having people who have flexible minds, understand different ways of working, different sensibilities, different approaches, because I think we're in an industry that's been here for years and years and years, and we have our own ways and the ways we work. And I think this links up nicely with the second point I picked up on, which was coming from Trevor, about the fact that we've, I think, demonstrated in this pretty challenging period our ability to change as a business and to adapt to new practices by using remote working, for example, more and more. And I'm going to go a bit even further than that. I think we're going to be shaken up a little bit by the wave of the new generations who are going to come with all this. They're looking for a purpose, a sense to what they're doing, and they're going to want us to be more flexible, and they're going to want us to be more adaptable, and they're going to want their work to be adapted to their ways of working, of living. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, adaptability helps everyone, doesn't it? If companies can move to a situation where they are more flexible. Turning to a new topic, Osita, large companies and big clients are often in the best position to sort of drive change. They command large sums of money often, which often talks in this industry. What can clients and main contractors do? What should they be doing to encourage positive change, not only in their own organisation, but throughout the supply chain that they work with?
Really good question, Lem. And really, this is an example, and I could speak about HS2 as a client with a number of suppliers we work with. And so we have direct relationship with our tier ones, but the challenge is not so much with the tier ones, it's those further down the supply chain at tier 2 and tier 3 level. And you find that those are where you find the SMEs, the small medium enterprises. And so I guess the challenge really is to look at how you become a role model. You know, what is it that as an organization you should be doing to attract women into your organization? So when you're putting out job adverts, is it really representative, or does it speak the right language to attract women into your organization? Or are you doing something as part of your legacy? We find a lot of construction companies do things they've always done. So the way they recruit, they will always recruit in the same way. They put out the images that suits them. So it's actually creating more diverse images to show that there are women in the organization and you want to attract women. You want to be in a position to also look at what you see as your sort of employee value proposition. You know, as a company, what makes people want to work for you? What makes them attracted to want to come into the organization? And, you know, really going back to some of the comments made earlier, Sophie, you just mentioned earlier in terms of there is a generational gap, and the generation expects us to be a lot more flexible, a lot more adaptable, and they have a choice now as to the type of companies they want to work for. And so if a professional woman has come out and wants to work within construction, it has to be attractive enough for her to do the same if she's got options elsewhere outside of the sector. So again, it's understanding what that looks like. And really, for you to do that, you need to engage with women in many ways. Those who are coming through your entry-level programs, whether that be apprenticeship programs or your graduate programs, to understand what their needs are. And I often feel that some of those small businesses either don't have the capacity or the resource to do that level of engagement and understand how they package themselves and make themselves attractive to female applicants overall.
Thanks. So, Sophie, what's your perspective, obviously working for a larger contractor, about how you encourage broader participation in this agenda about trying to make women more welcome across the board throughout the supply chain?
So what I agree with Osita on the communication side of things. I think what's important as an industry in general is to potentially change the image of the industry that we have out there, because at the moment a lot of the imagery, a lot of the mental representations that younger females may have at the moment is of a very male dominated industry. And it's still the case. I mean, when you look at LinkedIn, when you look at the internet at the moment, it's very rare to see female young professionals in orange, for example. So I think there's a big role to play in how we show ourselves out there. And I think, like Paige said previously on the previous question, there is a responsibility for the women who actually made it as far as being influential enough to be able to promote the industry. There is a responsibility on their side as well. From a more formal perspective, I'm a big believer that clients like High Speed 2 or the current client I'm working for at the moment, which is Thames Tideway, have their role to play in imposing KPIs, imposing targets to the contractors, which in turn will have no choice to do the same in their own procurement processes, and it will cascade down, maybe slowly, but eventually I think it will get there. So if we put some strict targets on what we expect from a business working for a big project or a smaller project in terms of diversity and inclusion, I think we give ourselves better chances to achieve what we want to achieve.
Sophie, you mentioned the role model aspect of seeing women in orange. That's something you spend some of your time in, I believe, isn't it?
I'm trying to, but I'm also trying to be relevant. So I don't want to be the person who's just a pretty picture. I think it doesn't have the impact of someone who actually does their job and does it the right way and likes doing it and talks about it in forums like that. My constant worry is about being relevant.
Well, thanks, Sophie. Trevor, what's your perspective about trying to drive the change across a wider number of organisations rather than just your own? How do you see that challenge?
Thanks. Well, it's interesting. I agree with the points that Sophie and Osita have just made. I mean, from a university perspective, I mean, we've got about 8,000 staff at the University of Birmingham, and there are, it's incredibly diverse and a lot of women in senior roles in the university. But actually, if you look at areas within the university, in particular trade areas, so the construction element does mirror what happens in the wider construction sector. There's more that we need to do. We need to be better. We need to get the imagery right. I think that was a really relevant point. We need to attract people in. We've got to get them through the door. So it's about making sure that you tell a compelling story and then you follow that through. You actually do create opportunities. And that's great for us to do that. As a large organisation, we probably have the ability to drive and influence some of that in terms of the spend that we have and the people that we work with. So the way that we're trying to influence, and the point that Osita made is really important, and it's the supply chain that you need to focus on. And it's probably not the major contractors, it's the subcontractors, and it's making sure it ripples down that supply chain. So you've got to try and be consistent with all of that. I mean, one of the ways that we're trying to approach that at the moment is through framework contracts. We've got a portfolio of work. We're working with a smaller number of major contractors in a supply chain, and what we're trying to do is really make sure we understand each other in terms of values, delivery, impact on campus when things are being delivered. So things like women in construction can become one of the topics that we discuss, and we actively set targets. So that's where I'd like to get to, is actually to try and drive influence rather than step back and just hope it happens organically.
Thanks, Trevor. Paige, I'll come to you last because Trad essentially is probably the other end of the telescope for this question as a specialist subcontractor. But what does that challenge look like for you about how Trad can influence perhaps its peers as well as others in the supply chain?
Yeah, I think we've got the opportunity to really influence in this area. Our CEO is a real advocate of women in the industry, and I've spent some time talking to him about this, and listening to why he's passionate about women being in industry is really lovely, but it's something not a lot of people will have heard. So for me, I think one of the things that we should be doing is promoting that. We should have people who are senior leaders in businesses who are really passionate about it, telling people the benefits of having women in construction, whether that's out on site or whether that's in offices. I don't think people shout about it enough, and then because of that, people don't really understand the benefit, and it's still a little bit, well, could a woman really do this role? But you know, Des was really passionate about it, and said it's really lovely to have a balanced team. But by no means are we there as a group in Trad. We've still got a long journey to go on, and I think we are part of the Trad group, and we do have a lot of influence in the industry. So reflecting on that, I think we've got the opportunity to invite smaller businesses to have these discussions with us and share our best practices with them. That's something I'm really keen to do. The other thing, I'm just picking up on Sophie's point there about being relevant. I think that's a really good point. Something that I always try to do, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable, is make sure I'm present for the business, make sure I'm visible. And you know, I'll sometimes go to events and you can see 3 females in the whole audience, and you'll get that, oh, look, you're here in construction. And so I think the more that we do that, the more that we'll change that mindset. So that's something I'm really passionate about, and I like the point you said there, Sophie. It's important that we're relevant, because once I step into my work forum, people can see that I know what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter whether I'm male or female, as long as I can be relevant for the business.
Thanks. Yes, as you say, competence speaks no matter who the words are coming from. Sophie, coming back to you, I wanted to touch on the question of glass ceilings, which are sometimes talked about how companies can encourage women into their business. and sometimes it can be difficult for them to make the same level of career progress or the same pace of career progress as their male counterparts. Is that something that you've witnessed or seen, and have you got any suggestions about how to avoid that happening?
I think first of all, this glass ceiling question is not a specifics to the construction industry. I don't see, and I really don't see why there should be such a thing in the construction industry any more than anywhere else, because when you reach a certain level in your organization, you should be able to work. If we go back to the flexibility question, because I think it's quite often related to why people would potentially drop off or hit a glass ceiling, is because they don't have supposedly they don't have the time to or the time, how would I say, they can't do long days, for example. But that's not typical to the construction industry. So I really think there is a fundamental issue in saying, oh, because you can't do the construction site hours, you're never going to be able to reach that level. So I think first of all, again, there needs to be a change of mindset as to why we think there is a glass ceiling, a problem that's particular to the construction industry, because that isn't true and that can't be true. There is the same in every industry. I think to overcome this, we need to look at the way we promote the women in the business and recruit them. So first of all, could we consider blind recruitment, for example? Is that something that's at all possible? That's a question, I think, for my co-panelists. I'm keen to hear the experience of Osita, for example, on the matter. Is that at all relevant at a certain level? I don't know, but I think that's potentially a way for improvement. Also, how do we promote women? Do we promote them the same way we promote men? Is there anything we can do on that front? Can we be a bit more clear on how you achieve a certain level in the business? What are the career paths achievable, and be visible about them, be more structured, basically.
Thanks, Sophie. Paige, what's your perspective on this question of ensuring that women can make career progress without hitting the buffers halfway through their career?
Yeah, I think fair recruitment policies, like Sophie touched on there, are integral to this. And also, I think giving people a chance. You hear, oh, this person's been recruited because I've seen they've done a really great job on that project, or I've recruited this person, or recruit such and such. Actually, if you've got somebody sat in your organisation who you think might be a little bit of a superstar, give them a chance. Somebody did that with me, and my career I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for some of those influential people in my career to date. So that's something that, yes, they may not be that person that's always been recommended, and it might be a little bit of a change for your organisation, but give them a chance and put them in that position. I think the other thing that I've experienced personally that's quite interesting is people always skirt around the difficult conversation. You'll be in an interview and you can tell that the person's thinking, she's quite young, she's probably going to want to have a baby. Have that conversation. It's okay. We're females. We know that we may want to have children. Let's have an open discussion about it and talk about how that would work for me and how that would work for the organisation I'm in. I think once organisations start to have open conversations and understand how women feel about that, they can put flexibility in place that works for them and the women. So that's really important to me. I think it's almost like a taboo subject. Let's not talk about having babies, but it's okay. So that's something that I'd like to see more of in organisations.
Thanks, Paige. That may be easy for you to say. I don't know if I was in your shoes. Trevor, how would you see this this question of making sure that women can reach their full potential in the same way that men do within the organisation?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, glass ceilings do exist, and they're not limited just to construction. So it's, I mean, from a HE perspective, there are examples. There are numerous women in major senior construction and estate management roles who are performing extremely well. So the evidence and the experience is out there. So there's no reason for this if you start to unpick it. But I think the problem is we maybe need to start to focus on constraints and barriers and try and unpick it bit by bit and try and work out, so what is getting in the way? What's stopping us getting, to a more level playing field to try and get to a position where we can get to perhaps a 50-50 split within teams. I mean, there are some tired old and traditional stereotypes that we're just going to have to try and work through, and that's going to be tough, but I don't think we're going to make progress until we do that. I mean, at the other end of the recruitment process, we do need to start to think about how we attract people into the industry, and also how we start to use graduates and apprenticeships to try and grow some of our own. And I think we're focusing on the question at the sort of glass ceiling end, but actually this is a sort of travelator from start to finish to bring people in, to give them experience, to give them opportunities. And I think we need to think of this as a whole process. But you're quite right. I mean, this glass ceiling issue does need to be tackled.
Thanks, Trevor. Osita, what's your perspective?
Thanks for that, Len. It's been interesting hearing the other panelists in the discussion around this. I think this is a big topical area, particularly around diversity. And for us at HS2, it's been one since I joined HS2 that's been discussed many times. We're in a sector within construction where there are just roughly 20% of women across the sector. Okay, and depending where you look, that number is not necessarily growing at the pace that we expect. When we look at HS2, how well are we doing? We're 36% women, and about 24% of those are in senior roles. So we're talking about roles which are above middle management. Within our middle management grade, we're talking about grade 19 to 20. Of women who are above that grade, the head of function or directorate, we're doing quite well, I think, in terms of a sector representation. But I think it goes beyond just the representation. So you've broken the glass ceiling and you're in more senior role. It's really to do with the challenges of those who are either in middle management or below that face. So as a female professional within construction, there are clear issues around sexism, discrimination, and the barriers that they face regularly. And whether the companies that support that in terms of formal processes to address that is a key thing. So are there formal grievance processes that actually work? Do HR have a mechanism that support that? And HR has a lot of responsibility. So beyond the sort of formal grievances, are there performance management? Are there promotional prospects that actually works, whereby there is an objective and fair way of performance managing? So when you do your one-to-one appraisal on a regular basis, are women overlooked for promotion for various reasons and other people brought on board? So until you've tested and reviewed your performance management, your succession planning, and your promotional policies and practices, you can never really truly say that you're doing the best you can to remove those barriers to attaining promotion and progress within the organization. And so when we talk about the glass ceiling, there's a multitude of layers to that glass ceiling. And I think those are some of the things that can prevent women progressing in the organization.
I think, Osita, sometimes sometimes companies will put in something like blind recruitment, take the names off CVs and think that they've got this issue cracked. But as you go further up the seniority level, those things can be perhaps less helpful, would you say?
Yeah, whilst blind auditioning, which we use at HS2, works, they're really only suitable for where you do high volume recruitment and for generic roles. So if you were recruiting for office admin, finance officer, project management type of roles, you would do large volume recruitment. Where you're going for more specific technical requirement, and certainly the more senior you are, it's a bit more challenging to use blind auditioning. So clearly, yes, you can use it up to when you get to sort of middle management grade, but then you need to introduce different elements beyond that to make it effective.
Thanks, Osita. I think we can now turn to some of the questions that have been put by the people watching. There's quite a few here, actually. So I'm just going to try and, there's a question here about, can we share the results of the Costain flexible model, which I think you mentioned, Osita, and we'll see if we can take that offline, because finding out something specific about that is probably beyond your remit. There's a question here: how do we communicate to leadership that having all our women at grad level and junior level is only symbolic of a problem with moving up through the company, and that they refuse to accept that they have a blind spot? I think that's a question about how do we communicate this issue and make sure this issue is taken seriously at the most senior levels, at the board level. Now, I don't know if any of our panel would care to volunteer for that. Paige, I might try ask you as an FD. You're at a senior role within your company. Obviously, you talked about how the CEO within your company had grasped this problem. Do you have a sense about how that came about? How your company took that decision that it was going to see this as a board level issue?
Yeah, so I think, not to speak for Des, but it is something that I was interested in understanding. He saw the value in having women in the business. You know, in our scaffolding contracting part of our business, we have a whole team of female QSs, surveyors, and it really worked well, and they were able to balance conversations. So that was, I think, what prompted Des to really become an advocate of having women in the construction industry. Again, ahead of today's meeting, we were having a discussion about what more can we do? Because yes, we say we're advocates for women in construction, and we would never not interview a woman to come into our industry. But do we proactively go out? Not enough. So internally, I think it's about continuing to challenge yourself all the time. So we've now put another project team in place. We're going to make sure that the interview processes always encompass female CVs. And the other thing is, and I saw it pop up in the Q&As, is there just something simple around education? So I do think out in our yards, out on our sites, just saying to some of the guys, oh, well, we could have a woman who's a safety officer. It doesn't need to be a guy. And just continuing to have those open conversations will really help take us forward.
Thank you, Paige. There's another question here, which has had a few votes. What if your company is still at the stage of saying we don't see gender? And then when a company tries to tackle the issue, this is seen as inevitably connected with positive discrimination, and that can cause, that can put people's backs up if they feel that perhaps that positive discrimination creates a situation of unfairness. Trevor, you have an experience of different industries and different situations. How do you think companies can tackle that, about the balance between doing something proactive and not having it seem as if they're creating an unfair, tilted playing field?
I think it's a really good point. It's a really tricky area, though. Unfortunately, I think the start point has to be, and it's a simple thing to say, but it's not always the case with some organisations, is to understand where you currently stand, what your workforce makeup is, and to start to effectively put a plan in place. And they could be a series of soft measures or policy measures. So you start to actively plan to improve where you are currently at to where you need to get to. With most change or transition, there will be people that support it and people that will go with it. There will be people that will reel against it, and that's just a fact of business life. And I think my point earlier on, though, be really clear, be consistent, and make sure that you're communicating. Why are you making the change? Why is it important? Why are you trying to address the issue? As I say, it's really tricky. I mean, this is easy to say, but very, very difficult to deliver. And that's probably all I can say on that.
And if any of our other panelists would care to talk about how to make positive action seem like it's fair to everyone.
Yes, good question, really. And as Trevor just mentioned, it is a tricky one. I think the starting point is, first of all, to acknowledge that there's no such thing as positive discrimination. I know it's a term often used by the majority group to talk about the minority group. So the male dominant sector that we're in, they will often feel that there is some kind of preferential treatment given to women, which is a bizarre way of thinking actually, because we know that what exists within the dominant culture is practices of direct appointments, colloquial ways of bringing people into the organization, using their network to their advantage and bringing people who look just like them. And then to refer to where barriers exist for women, which are real. And I'm referring now to one of the questions that just come up about somebody's experience of sexism at work. These are very real things that women experience. So really what you have to look at, I think more so, is directly the culture of the organization and how it's perceived and experienced by those working there. I'm very clear that some of the things you can do around promoting gender and creating an environment that feels more inclusive for women, depending where you are in the organization, it can feel very different. If you're a more junior member of staff, your experience will be very different in terms of whether you feel protected, whether you have a voice, etc. If you're more senior in the organization or you're a supplier to the client, the picture can feel a lot more inclusive. So again, I think it's with a mind and a focus around those things. I think that's where the attention should be paid.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm going to come to you with this question. It's from Christina Smith asking, how do companies measure their progress? How do they become aware of bad behaviour that's going on that might be detrimental to women's progress? Do you have any experience of that? I hope you do, about how a company can be aware of what's going on throughout its organisation, because sometimes things from the board level might look wonderful. If they're looking at spreadsheets, they're not aware that there's sexist banter or that there are managers who don't promote women and things like that. How do companies make sure that the problem is made visible?
It's a very good question, and the answer is, personally, I have not experienced such a thing as a way to measure these kind of little incivilities, because I think the way it's very the way the women would feel them if they did indeed exist would be quite subtle, and they wouldn't think, or they wouldn't feel either the need to or comfortable enough to raise the matter further, because it's a very small comment, it's a small look, or it's a small banter, or what is seen as banter, and I don't want to make a fuss out of it. So I think it's a tricky one, to be honest, because I think it would take a lot for women to start reporting something up the food chain. And indeed, it creates this kind of two tiers organization where the management is under the impression that they're facilitating promotion and recruitment in a happy world where, yes, we are bringing in more women and we are promoting them, but then what is actually at the basis of what could make women potentially come and go or not even come isn't really fed back up the chain. And I don't know what the answer is, to be honest, to this, because I think it's also a matter of personalities, and some people will decide that it's okay and they can live with it, or some people will decide it is not okay, and different people will tackle it differently.
Thank you, Sophie. I should just say, in one of the earlier webinars that we had, somebody from Wilmot Dixon was talking about a program they had, their poster campaign, to try to encourage people to call out every time they saw something that they found unacceptable, and I think they had a means to report that anonymously, and that kind of measure, I suppose, can help. I don't know if any of the other panelists have experienced similar processes that they would like to talk about. Yeah, Len, so in regards to how employees can have a voice, particularly women, I think there are many ways to do that, really. I think organizations that do employee staff survey and looking at satisfaction levels is one way. Certainly, we do pulse survey at given points just to check the sort of experience
views and impact on staff members. And the importance of doing that is that you're not looking generically across the staff members, but you're looking at more specific practices you have in place that may impact on women or may impact on those with disability, etc. So you actually create these questions with real intent, because I think sometimes it can feel tokenistic in the sense that if there is no feedback or implementation of changes, then it's just giving your views and nothing happens. So I think it's creating that full cycle of feedback and implementation and taking things forward with real intent and making a commitment to make that change. You can also, alongside that, start to create staff networks or employee networks where things that are impacting on particular groups, particularly if it's women, there should be a forum for women to discuss those things. But the audience and the participants should be the decision makers in the organization, who in some cases are predominantly men. They should be involved in those networks to be able to take whatever the issues are forward and make the change and be held accountable. So until you start to create those mechanisms in terms of voices, engagement, and getting a sense of what's happening on the ground, so to speak, you would really not make much change in that area.
Well, thank you very much, Osita. That's a very helpful insight. I'm afraid we're out of time at this point. We've had a large number of questions come in, and I apologise sincerely that we didn't get to reach on all of them. I don't think I've seen quite so many questions come in any of the webinars I've chaired. So today's debate hopefully has been helpful and interesting. It just remains for me to thank our panelists today, Sophie, Paige, Osita and Trevor, for sharing their thoughts. And once again, thanks to our sponsors for their support as well. Our next event in the Inspiring Women programme will not be till the new year, I'm afraid. And more details about our 2021 programme will be published in due course. But for now, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. I hope today's webinar has provoked some thoughts. From all of us here, goodbye.